These days, every official visit, every summit that involves the President of the United States seems like a mad scramble to keep the leader of the Atlantic Alliance on board. But what if it's just too late? Last month, leaders left France thanking their lucky stars that Donald Trump hadn't taken a big bazooka to the G7 summit. In Ankara, a darker Donald, threatening to pull all U.S. troops from Europe, cut trade with Spain, blasting NATO for its unwillingness to join his war against Iran. He claimed he wouldn't have even shown up had it not been for his friend Recep Tayyip Erdogan being the host. Putting put-downs and popularity contests aside, it's real lives that are at stake. How do allies go faster in providing defense systems against Russia's cruise missiles lobbed on Ukraine? What if Vladimir Putin, whose citizens are feeling the pinch from Ukrainian drones targeting power and fuel supplies in Russia, decides to go for broke and test the resolve of frontline European states? What would NATO do then? We'll ask about Trump's bilateral meeting with Ukrainian counterpart Volodymyr Zelensky and the future of global security. For 8 decades, the guarantor of that security was the United States. Was the United States or still is? Today in the France 24 debate, we're talking about a day where NATO's been on a bit of a roller coaster ride. With us, former French ambassador to the alliance from 2019 to 2024, Muriel Domenac. We'll ask you in a moment if you wished you'd been there in Ankara. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
From Izmir in Turkey, former Turkish diplomat Mehmet Oyçuk, chair of the London Energy Club networking body. Welcome to the show.
My pleasure.
Elliot Waldman is editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Thanks for stopping into the studio here in Paris.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Reminder that if you're on the go, you can listen to the show wherever podcasts are streamed. Now, he played nicer after lunch, most notably when the U.S. president talked up chances of providing licenses for Ukraine to produce Patriot missiles and even purchasing Ukrainian-made drones. In the morning, however, Donald Trump firing on all cylinders. Solange Mougin has more.
Even before the main session of NATO talks began Wednesday, and as world leaders were still arriving, verbal bombshells were flying. In a question and answer session, Donald Trump said that as far as he was concerned, the ceasefire deal with Iran was dead.
I think it's over. I don't want to deal with them anymore. They're scum. You know what scum is? They're scum. They're sick people. They're led by sick people.
The unexpected announcement came on the heels of extensive U.S. strikes on Iran over its attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. president did say, though, that negotiations could continue. But oil prices immediately jumped after Trump said he was throwing in the towel. And it's not just the Iran comment that came as a surprise. While the U.S. president has repeatedly criticized NATO allies in the past, who he says don't contribute enough funding to the alliance's defenses, and who he says haven't helped with strikes on Iran, Trump this time vehemently targeted Spain.
Spain is a wasted cause. We don't want to do any trade business with Spain anymore, by the way. I'd like you to cut it off. Spain is a terrible partner in NATO. They don't participate. They don't pay. I don't want anything to do with Spain. Cut off all trade with Spain, please.
The Spanish Prime Minister's office responded by saying it was treating the statements as business as usual. And then there was Trump's renewed desire to control Greenland, calling it a big problem. Denmark, in turn, responded by saying it and NATO would defend every inch of the Danish-controlled territory. Sitting beside the president, NATO chief Mark Rutte laid on the diplomacy. He praised Trump for successfully forcing EU nations to contribute more to the alliance's defense funds.
Grab to win, it's there. You did this. It was The Hague, and now they're implementing. And on Greenland, you and I made a deal in Davos. I will make sure that that deal is step by step being implemented.
According to Bloomberg, NATO is considering skipping next year's summit to avoid further tensions with Donald Trump.
So, Muriel Domenac, you know, the NATO Secretary General, the former Dutch Prime Minister, he's taken a lot of heat since last year in that come to daddy remark in the Oval Office. But judging by the day that's just unfolded, do you look at Mark Rutte in a different light? His job is to keep Donald Trump on board.
Right. He sees his job as having to hug Donald Trump close and flatter him, so to keep him on board. It's not clear whether he's actually achieving results in doing so. He's being more and more criticized for lacking basic decency. I guess, and this is a very European and I would add French perspective, but if we are to raise our public opinions, awareness that we actually have to rearm while keeping the Americans on board so that they don't pull the plug, brutally, then I think we have to project decency as a way to be respected by the American president and also to project credibility in terms of deterrence to our adversaries and attractivity to our partners.
Okay, so
I wouldn't see, the flattery course as achieving results, and I think it's counterproductive to our public opinion. So, of course, one would argue that Mark Rutte is speaking in his own name, but I think he would do a favor to all of us if he would show a little bit more decency. The good thing about freedom of the press and our democracies is I see a Danish reporter dared ask him a question on
a Dutch reporter.
Okay, I thought he was Danish. Whatever, freedom of the press, and to my surprise, Mark Rutte sounded unsurprised and stuck to his line. In any way, I mean, it's not achieving results. We heard Donald Trump at the press conference with Rutte in Washington a couple of weeks ago, arguing that he wouldn't have come if it hadn't been for Erdogan, just in the face of Rutte. So, I mean, the Europeans have to act like adults, and flattery is not paying.
So, Mehmet, we just come out of the closing press conference of the U.S. We heard a lot of the U.S. president today. And there suddenly, after all the vitriol that you saw in that report, he says there was such unity in the room. We didn't have a fly on the wall inside to confirm that. But so it's, it's up and down. It's a roller coaster ride. Do you agree that the way we can have a calmer existence inside of the Atlantic Alliance is with less flattery, as Muriel was saying?
Well, I think flattery is also part of the game. Trump loves it. If you flatter him, then you can speak to him. And if you challenge him, he will treat you as an enemy. And we like it or not, that's how it works. Therefore, NATO Secretary General did his job. And also, in a similar way, he had to flatter somehow President Erdogan. He had to dump the questions about the freedom of press and other issues, because the focus here in Ankara, how the NATO will be moving forward in the new era, because it's no longer the same NATO as we had. Macron called it, brain dead. Trump says we can even pull out, and it is Europeans' responsibility. They don't respond to our call for action in the Strait of Hormuz. So NATO is not an easy situation. If you want to keep the unity and also engineer NATO towards the new challenges and risks in the new era, I think it is important that we should divorce ourselves from emotional criticism attachments. So we have to focus on the hard facts. That's probably what they try to do, to keep Trump strategically engaged in NATO, where he's not so much interested. As our colleague said, he said he came to Ankara just because of Erdogan, to please him. Right. And then Erdogan, of course, has his own weaknesses, shortcomings, especially in terms of democracy in the country and the freedoms. Then I think the leaders didn't want to divert attention from core issues to domestic Turkish issues. So that's a matter of, I think, focusing sharply on what NATO needs to achieve. Whether they are going to have tangible results at the end of the summit, this needs to be seen. But as it stands, NATO is not serving the purpose it was established for. We have seen what happened in Ukraine. We have seen also in out-of-area operations. And NATO, at least the European partners, are trying to raise defense spending to the levels that Trump is trying to impose. This is needed. If we cannot replace America in Europe, and because it's a huge military power, Europe doesn't have this military capability yet. We are keeping Turkey out, especially in the European defense architecture, due to Cyprus and Greece blocking the way. And then what kind of security are we going to have the new geopolitical environment? Because we are surrounded by challenges in the Black Sea, South Caucasus, Iran, Hormuz, and then Red Sea, East Med, and Turkey is at the center of all these challenges. Whether we like the regime or not, we have to work. The same with Israel and the United States as well.
Yeah, and we heard in that press conference, as you say, Donald Trump heaping praise on the host, Muriel Domenac pointing out that you can't and you can't from one day to the next sever ties with the United States. There was this bombshell of a threat on the first day of the summit, Tuesday, when Donald Trump talked about pulling all U.S. troops out of Europe. Elliot Waldman, 80,000 of them. There's loads of bases in places like Germany, Italy, Poland, etc. Again, we're always wondering, the day begins, we think the train has left the station and that the U.S. is ready to destroy NATO. And then at the end of the day, it's he's saying there is unity. We're all in together. It's like an abusive relationship.
It really is. It's hard to avoid the sort of couples metaphors when you're talking about the transatlantic relationship these days. You know, you talk about NATO summits being couples therapy for a difficult marriage or something like that. But, you know, to your point, I think Trump is someone who likes to just be very bombastic in everything he says. He'll make these very extravagant claims like pulling all forces out of Europe. Never mind the fact that the U.S. benefits from having U.S. Forces in Europe too. It helps the U.S. project power around the world. The war in Iran recently would have been very difficult for the U.S., if not impossible, if were it not for the ability to station troops. And
so is he serious? Is he serious when he says he wants to quit Greenland, that he wants to take Greenland, that he wants to cut trade ties with Spain?
I think the Greenland thing is something he's hanging on to quite a lot. I mean, this has kind of been an obsession of Trump since his first term. If you go back to then, he was kind of making a big issue of this toward the end of his first term. And unfortunately, I don't think there's that much of an awareness in the U.S. of just how rattled this makes people in Europe. The idea of the U.S. threatening to annex, even by military means, the territory of a NATO ally. I mean, that's just unheard of. And unfortunately, I think for a lot of people in the White House and in Trump's orbit, they just think of it, well, we're just going to grab it. Why not?
And there was one reporter at the closing press conference who asked, Article 5, an attack against one is an attack against all. Would that still be the case for places like Italy and Spain with which he's had a spat? And he didn't actually state categorically yes.
Well, that's the scenario that a lot of NATO leaders are now having to grapple with. I mean, you talk about an all-out attack. I think in that case, the U.S. would be difficult to kind of totally push to the side its Article 5 obligations. But there are certain other scenarios that you have to think about. One that a lot of European officials talk about these days is, for example, let's say there was a drone swarm in the Baltics that Russia, sends hundreds or even thousands of drones across the border and denies that they did it, says it was a Ukrainian false flag attack. And maybe Trump will say, well, I agree with Putin. There's no evidence to show that it was a Russian attack. And then where does that leave the Europeans? These are the kinds of scenarios that they have to grapple with, and it's not easy.
Is NATO over as it was even when you were ambassador to it?
You know what? Organizations never die. or they rarely die. But organizations and even more political alliances can be devitalized. And clearly, Donald Trump has repeatedly been casting doubts on the credibility of Article 5 by, expressing doubts, demanding whatever transactional that the Europeans should be doing more on Iran, while they hadn't been on board when he decided to launch this operation. And three, I mean, who would have thought that the U.S. president would express predatory appetite on an allies territory?
Is it about one man or is it about a country?
Good question.
Is the United States
clearly,
no
since
longer...
the Obama years, and we Europeans have to live up to it, have been expressing what they've been repeating a long time American expectation that the Europeans should be sharing more of the burden. Now we're in a different situation. It's a burden shifting that we are faced with. So even if the Democrats would be back, it wouldn't be business as usual. And the Europeans have to live up to this. They have to provide more for their own security. Now, I want to go back to the Greenland point, because Greenland has been a game
Because that's not
changer.
burden shifting, that's hostility.
That's even hostility. Of course, President Trump's opening press conference yesterday in Ankara, I believe, was NATO's crisis in a nutshell, expressing appetite or legitimate rights on an allies territory, threatening that if he's not satisfied, he might pull the plug and withdraw all of U.S. forces out of Europe, dog whistling as national populists in Europe with this insistence on immigration, and there will be no more Europe. I mean, all of this, and then last, raising doubts that he would be in a position to honor the United States' obligations in terms of Article 5. So in terms of NATO as an organization, I'm pretty positive that it will survive. I mean, activating Article 13 and withdrawing the U.S. from the Washington Treaty would be a difficult one under Elliott's control. Now, Article 5 is about credibility, showing determination, and on that one, I think it's fair to say the Europeans have doubts. Now that they have doubts, they should make their own conclusions and raise their profile in terms of our defense.
Because Atlantists dismissed Donald Trump's first election in 2016 as a fluke. It took years for Europeans to start shoring up their own defenses. And it's not the first time leaders have had trouble reprogramming their political GPS. It was all the way back in 2007 that Vladimir Putin threw down the gauntlet to the West at the Munich Security Conference. Even after Russia's war with Georgia a year later, its annexation of Crimea in 2014, and the push into eastern Ukraine, it remained mostly business as usual between Russia and the EU. It was only the all-out invasion of Ukraine in 2022 where finally there was this switch. With the United States, at what point is the United States no longer an ally but an adversary?
With this administration, I have to say that the United States is formally an ally and will have to, organize the defense of Europe probably with less America, but counting that there will be part of America with us in case chips are down. But yes, they have a tendency to act and treat us as vassals and predatory appetite, I have to say. So, but I mean, there's the right way to handle Trump, I think, and this was exemplified with Greenland, is to show strengths. You know, when the Europeans, in the margins of Davos, Mehmet Bey was referring to Davos, showed unity, showed preparedness to activate the coercion instrument, possibly retaliate in terms of tariffs, and that probably did not cease but suspended the Greenland maneuver. Now, as we heard yesterday, I think President Trump has a Greenland obsession. He will be back. We'll have to face the music.
Mehmet Oyçu, is it a problem with Donald Trump that Europe has, or is it a problem with the United States?
Yes, I think that's the right question, because if Trump goes away in the next election, whether the US position is going to change or not, I think the main assertion I would like to have is, rather than seeing NATO and also US approach to security, it's not Eurocentric for them. Yes, of course, Europe has a problem with Russia, but US has a bigger challenge globally. It has to counter China, which now it poses as a systemic competitor, not an enemy. It has to deal with the Gulf, Strait of Hormuz, Malacca Strait, and also the backyard in Latin America. We saw what happened in Venezuela, what's going to come in Cuba very soon, I believe. I think this is part of the big global blueprint US has. NATO is only part of it. Therefore, in Europe, of course, we focus so much on our security issues, but for US is the bigger issue. And it feels that not only Trump, but the US administration and the US establishment, especially military establishment, that we are helping Europe so much. We help them to win the Cold War, but Europe is not helping us at all in other areas. Therefore, what's the reason we should engage more firmly and also support European defense when they are not supporting themselves? Now, defense spending is increasing, whether it's going to turn into a real military capability in Europe. And even vis-a-vis Turkey, as I mentioned, from whichever direction you look at it, whether you like or hate Turkey, it is at the epicenter of all these security threats. And still, Europe is excluding Turkey because of the Cyprus and Greece objections. Therefore, I think we have to look at ourselves as well. What kind of security architecture we are going to have with or without the United States? I don't believe that this approach in Washington will change even after Trump leaves the scene.
Muriel Domenac, a quick word on this.
Very short response on the Turkey exclusion point. I think there's two things. One, yes, Greece and Cyprus, but not only Greece and Cyprus are a little bit nervous that the Turkish leadership has been expressing kind of threats. I mean, let's be frank, to Greece and Cyprus. Even the resurgence of the Mavi Vatan, the blue homeland doctrine that would infringe on Greece and Cyprus's territorial waters, of course, is an issue. And then there's a second issue that where Turkey's claims meets to a certain extent the U.S. Claims that European EU funds should not exclude non-EU allies. Now, it's an issue, of course, that the negotiators, diplomats have to negotiate, but of course the EU's taxpayer money has to go to the EU if we are to convince our public opinions to spend more.
EU differences spilling over into NATO. Donald Trump was, again, we talked about the Bad Cop Act this morning. After lunch, Donald Trump full of praise for Volodymyr Zelensky, alluding to last year's White House bust-up. The U.S. president stating, quote, "It's hard to believe from the Oval Office to now we've actually developed a very good relationship." Trump even said he'd consider buying Ukrainian drones touted by the Ukrainian president, as Zelensky talked up aerial advances on the battlefield against Russia and a swing in momentum.
We are trying to move this war to the sky from the battlefield. That's why we now begin to control the battlefield. This is very important. It's difficult when you have less people to move them back. But we found another way how to do it, to cut their logistic for their army. It's about weapon, petrol, diesel, without massive human losses. That is the difference between us, by the way. Russia.
Yeah, Elliot Waldman, Donald Trump, he, for his part, saying the usual, equivocating, nice things about Zelensky, nice things about Vladimir Putin. But he also did say that maybe the Ukrainians would get what they really want right now, which is these licenses to build Patriot missiles on home soil.
Yeah, I believe he did. He did say that he would be granting those licenses to Ukraine, and that will be a help. I mean, the long-range strikes that Russia launched against Ukraine a couple days ago, I believe Ukraine wasn't even able to shoot down a single one of those ballistic missiles. They were able to intercept the drones, but not the missiles. And so that's a big threat to Ukraine, and they are getting absolutely pummeled right now. It's a terrible thing. But, the Patriot missile licenses, those are more of a long-term investment. That's what's important to note. It's not going to be an immediate change on the ground because it's going to take time to ramp up those capabilities.
There was a question at one point, can you give Zelensky some Patriot missiles now, a reporter asked, and he said, no, we need them.
We're all out of them. That's what he was really thinking, right? They've been shooting them all in the Middle East, and the U.S. is the defense industrial base is in such a poor state right now.
A poor state.
It's difficult for them to ramp up production of those interceptors. I believe they're only producing a few hundred a year.
A poor state, you say?
The defense industrial base in the U.S. Yeah, their ability to manufacture those interceptors.
And so. What does that say? The Atlantic Alliance is all about U.S. strength.
Well, yeah, the actual capabilities that the U.S. brings to the alliance are real, right? I mean, we shouldn't discount that completely. But at the same time, the U.S. is a little bit overextended right now, given the recent conflict in Iran. We saw it having to pull capabilities back from the Asia Pacific in order to shift them over to the Middle East, to the great consternation of U.S. allies in Tokyo and in Seoul.
At one point, Donald Trump was asked whether or not Volodymyr Zelensky would go to Moscow with talks with Vladimir Putin. And Zelensky quipped that, I don't know, there's a lot of Ukrainian drones falling. I'm not sure it's safe. So a bit of a dig at the Russians there. We talked about it last week on this show, this switch in momentum. Again, is it because of that switch in momentum that now the U.S. president is talking about these, giving what the Ukrainians what actually Joe Biden never gave them?
Patriots, Joe Biden gave. Military support, Joe Biden gave. Now, I'm not Joe Biden's spokeswoman. From a French perspective, the Evian G7 summit was achieved dynamics in terms of reconvergence, as we say in French, with the U.S. administration reinstoring sanctions on Russian oil, and also with the joint communique agreeing that Ukraine is being aggressed and deserves support. Now, President Trump's question to President Zelensky today, asking, whether he would fly to Moscow, shows that we are not there yet in terms of recognizing what is it that Ukraine is facing in Europe with Ukraine, with this major aggression, as if President Zelensky didn't risk risk, being literally killed the minute he lands in Moscow. I thought President Zelensky's response was just perfect. He quietly answered, it's a dangerous place, Moscow, with all of those drones flying, and probably it's the good way to handle Donald Trump. Just,
And he kept a poker face when they talked about this license to produce Patriot missiles.
He kept a poker face, but also responding in terms of, we are flying drones in the depths of Russia's territories, a way to get Donald Trump to at least agree, if not for moral reasons, at least for, factual reasons, that Ukraine is not a loser. Ukraine is actually winning the case in terms of resisting. So, I mean, speaking under Elliot's control, probably that can achieve more than any kind of flattery. Showing Ukraine is not losing is probably Ukraine's best.
Yeah. Trump is someone who respects strength, at the end of the day. And that's why, coming back to the point about Mark Rutte's tactics, there's only so far that can go because Trump sees that as a kind of obsequiousness. And after a certain time, I think he just starts to lose respect when all you're doing is heaping praise onto him.
Mehmet Oyçu.
Yes, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan was in Moscow 5-6 days ago. And he met all the ministers, including Lavrov, Defense Secretary, chief advisors, and then President Putin. They had very, very long discussions. It was a sightseeing tour of Red Squares, and just before the NATO summit taking place. And a day before the summit, Trump also spoke on telephone to Putin. 1.5 hours, and then he briefed Zelensky about this meeting, and he said he's quite hopeful that something will happen soon. About a month ago, I was in Moscow myself and having discussions with two top advisors of Putin, Dmitry Trenin and Sergei Karaganov. One clear message I got from our discussion was, because especially Karaganov is the proponent of the nuclear deterrence in Russia. And remember also Trump said several times in Ankara, 35,000 Russian soldiers were killed in 1 month only. Therefore, the Russians are considering very seriously the nuclear deterrence issue. And two advisors told me that alongside the border of Poland and Baltic republics, they are deploying tactical nuclear missiles. And so it is escalating somehow. If conventional weapons are not serving the purpose, whether nuclear options, not the all-out nuclear option, but tactical short-range missiles could be deployed or not. So the Russians are seriously considering that. When they make a threat, we have to take it seriously, as we have seen what happened in Georgia, in Crimea, in now eastern Ukraine. So whether we like it, whether we find it trustworthy or credible or not, there is such a threat that the Russians are drumming up quite loudly in recent weeks.
Muriel Dominac, we've heard so many nuclear-sized threats from the Kremlin over the last 4 years that is it the boy who cried wolf?
Interestingly enough, the Russian authorities, I realized that Karaganov and Solovyov and,
these are the
people...
the hosts on Russian television there.
Exactly. Are doing a lot of nuclear intimidation.
But what do you make of what those top advisors told Mehmet about what was happening on the borders with the EU?
They're not with the administration exactly. I mean, the Russian nuclear posture has not been changing. The doctrine has not been changing. So yes, it's clearly a signal that those people are sort of agitating the threat of every time Russia was in a difficult position on the front, they raised the nuclear threat to try and intimidate, especially us Europeans, please note that the Ukrainians are not impressed. Please note that the front is 1,300 kilometers long and that it sadly, a technical use would not even be enough. And please note that the Chinese have been constantly warning Russia against such options. So, of course, Mehmet Bey is totally right. We should take any Russian expression seriously. Now, I would suggest that we focus on their strategic posture and the reality of what's being played on the ground, and also not not express, not amplify their rhetorics. Otherwise, we would act as Stalin said, useful idiots of the Russians.
Useful idiots we are not. Let's talk about the Turkey's position when it comes to Ukraine. We heard Recep Tayyip Erdogan state today support for the U.S. president. I don't know if we'll call it flattery, but in any case, support, while at the same time announcing that Ankara was joining, watch out, geek alert, something called Pearl, which is the NATO initiative that pools funds and equipment for Ukraine.
I share Mr. Trump's vision for peace in the Ukraine conflict. I express my support for the prioritized Ukraine requirements list initiative.
So, Mehmet Oytru, Turkey on the quiet has been supplying Ukraine with some equipment, all the while keeping with zero sanctions on Russia and keeping the phone lines open all the time with Moscow. The fact that they announced they're joining this prioritized Ukraine requirement list initiative, though, that's a step, isn't it?
It is, but I mean, if you observe it from the very beginning, Ankara is trying to strike the right balance between Ukraine and Russia. And Ankara's heart is with Ukraine, not because of their beautiful eyes, but strategically speaking, Turkey doesn't want the Black Sea to be dominated by Russia. But on the other hand, Russia is a neighbor. You are bound by the geography. And Turkey is the only country which is trusted in the region by Kiev, Moscow at the same time, and also can speak Tehran, Beijing, and all others. Therefore, this is a credible position which is in favor of NATO as well. Because Turkey has tremendous ties economically, energy-wise, and politically with Russia. And in terms of trade, it's very considerable. Huge amount of Russian tourists are coming to Turkey. Russia provided the air defense system, S-400, which is troublesome now in many ways, and nuclear power stations in Akkuyu. Therefore, it's a balanced strategy. However, Turkey is not shying away from condemning and not recognizing the annexation of Crimea, neither Ukraine. Therefore, I think Turkish position you have to see as a delicate balancing act, but more in favor of Ukraine than Russia. And Russia understands this because of the dialogue that they have, personal chemistry between Erdogan and Putin, and Fidan going quite often there talking to Russian officials. Therefore, they understand that Turkey's strategic interest lies for a peace between two countries, and Black Sea not dominated by Russia, neither NATO should enter the Black Sea, making it even more complicated. That's not an easy position.
No, it's not easy. Elliot Waldman, when the summit began, people were surprised because Donald Trump off the cuff said, we're going to lift sanctions on Turkey linked to its purchase of those Russian air defense systems, the kind that shoot down F-35s, U.S.-made fighter jets. At the closing press conference, though, Donald Trump, while heaping praise on Erdogan, didn't say he would sell F-35s to the Turkish.
Yeah, I think he might have gotten out just a tad over his skis there at the beginning. I mean, this is, a pretty contentious issue. It's a transfer of enormously sensitive technology, and it would raise hackles among some other U.S. allies in the region. So I think, this is going to be a tricky knot for Trump to thread if he wants to actually sell F-35s to Turkey.
All right, before we go, far from the Turkish capital, the western French town of La Flèche. It's near the race car circuit of Le Mans. It's there this Wednesday that far-right leader Marine Le Pen kicked off her presidential election campaign. This less than 24 hours after a French appeals court upheld her corruption conviction but reduced her sentence, making it possible for her to run next April. This glad handling, there were some counter demonstrators too, but that's another story. Muriel Domenac, it's a regular campaign. Is this a threat for NATO? Marine Le Pen, if she is the front runner and she's somebody who's had political campaigns financed by Vladimir Putin, if she's elected, is that a problem?
The far-right's position on NATO has been changing and it's not stabilized yet. So far, the Marine Le Pen has been saying she would consider exiting the military command. It's not clear what would be the benefit of it, and it's not clear, what their position is in terms of Russia. And last, it's pretty clear that although they claim they're not thinking of a Frexit, their idea, typically populist, that
because the high command in France is staunchly pro-Ukrainian. How would they take?
It's not that the command in France is staunchly pro-Ukrainian. It's that everyone sees in France that our interest is to keep supporting Ukraine. If Ukraine doesn't get support from a central EU member state as France, then
So what would a President Le Pen mean for France, for Germany, for NATO?
I think, again, for NATO, it would be a huge question mark. For Ukraine, it would be lack of support. For Russia, possibly an attempt to try and divide the Europeans. And last, in terms of EU unity, having a populist political party in France promising that after they get elected, they'll rush to Brussels and suggest that we divide our contribution by 2, but still we want to be the first beneficiary in terms of a common agricultural policy is simply not going to work. So pretty much like in the US, claiming that we will fix it is while with fake promises is not good news, to our European allies. So a lot of anxiety clearly across Europe at the prospect that there might be a far-right government in France, to be honest, but time will say.
What is the biggest threat to NATO going forward? Elliot Waldman.
Intra-European disunity.
I agree.
Bigger than anything else. Mehmet Oyçu, you agree?
Well, I think that's true. The other issue is that we are always discussing in yesterday's terms. NATO has changed. The environment around us has changed. So we are talking about NATO 3.0. So we got to be prepared to that. And we have to revisit all our established concepts and strategies. And intra-European unity, I think, is essential. Nobody outside will come and save us. Don't trust US at all. So we should be a powerful part of the NATO and Europe, but don't trust US only. There are other challenges and risks we have to deal with, not the traditional risk, asymmetrical risk.
All right, the NATO summit is over. The next item on the agenda will be a meeting here in Paris on the eve of Bastille Day of a so-called coalition of the willing to help Ukraine. We'll hopefully be talking about that. That's coming up, next week. Muriel Domenac, I want to thank you. I want to thank as well Elliot Waldman, Mehmet Oyçu for being with us from Izmir. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.